two-bit to begin with.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't put two and two together that you were Knicks fans. Now I saw you sit. I see your profile though. You're standing side by side, and that's obvious. You guys got the same profile.
Yes, we do.
Except you did like one of those generational photos where you stand side by side, but like the.
Nick hopes he's that good looking. See ya. Thank you.
everything's fine.
Like I said, I don't know that to be true, just,
Oh, yeah.
that's wishful thinking. No, but if you read that, that's the
Meeting called to order. Please join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Here.
Ms. Delay? Ms. Martin?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Mia Chow?
Here.
Ms. Chun? 6 present, 1 absent.
Thank you, and I want to welcome everyone to the chamber this evening, and also I would like to welcome the newly elected senator of the Student Council from Lowell High School, Mr. Nicholas Porter. Welcome to chamber. It's great to have you here. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, my name is Nicholas Porter. I am the senior class senator for Lowell High School. I'm also the varsity goalkeeper, and I run indoor and outdoor track, and I'm a part of NHS and Student Council.
That is awesome. Very exciting. Thank you for the introduction. We now go to the next item on the agenda, the special order of business. The 4 is the minutes. Need a motion to approve the special and the regularly scheduled meeting minutes of the Lowell School Committee of October 5th, 2022, and to place them on file by Ms. Mon, second by Ms. Thompson. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Now go to section 5, permission to enter. Any comments or question? Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Your Honor. There were 2 items I had questions about. Catherine Carey and Alexandra Grant for $18,726 each, and that is mentorship, including outreach, home visit, and re-engagement support to students at risk of dropping out. And my question really is, how do these fit in with the position? Didn't we create a position? And I'm sorry, the title is escaping me, but the sole purpose was to re-engage students that were about to drop out. And so my question is, how do these 2 positions work with that position, and how many students are involved?
Mr.
Thank you.
Superintendent?
Ms. Turner, can you take them through the finances, and then if there's any additional questions?
So both of these are paid for by the Mass Grad Promise and Practice Grant. I don't know how it's coordinated with the other position. Ms. Desmond, do you have any idea of how it's coordinated with the position? Okay.
So the Mass Grad Grant is a grant that myself and Lauren Campion work on annually. We had it last year as well. It funded our part-time attendance monitor support staff that helped our attendance office, Heather Ganley. And these positions went out to homes to help re-engage students through the attendance office. It's been a very successful grant, and we have been receiving it for several years.
So how does it interact? Didn't we create a full-time position with a similar agenda? I'm
So-
not faulting that it's not a good grant or that we're not using it. I'm just trying to understand. We created a full-time position with this focus.
So there's actually, I think there's 2 things here. So this is funds that help support the attendance office. And so the attendance office has always had an attendance officer, and then also a support staff position. So what this grant does is fund 2 part-time people who do similar work to the support staff position within the attendance office. So this is monitoring dropouts and bringing them back. So it's a little different from, you're talking about the director of the engagement center. So the director of the engagement center position is a position where once the students are found and brought back, that position would actually meet with the students, look at their transcripts, develop plans to figure out what is the best path for that particular child, I say child, student, young adult, to get through to graduate with a credential. Sometimes it's a diploma, sometimes it might be, a general education diploma or GED, depending on the age and sort of where the student's at. So I guess one is really the attendance piece and sort of recovering our students that we don't know where they are, and then the other is more of a counseling position that helps develop a
Support.
path for success.
I
hope
understand,
answered
thank
the
you. Do you have any idea about how many students we're talking about?
So the attendance office, I will defer to Mr. Skinner because it falls under the chief school officer, the attendance office, and so I don't want to misspeak. I do have a sense because I actually spoke to Heather Ganley about these positions recently, but I just don't want to say something that might be not accurate right now, so.
Mr. Skinner?
Specifically, attendance, you're looking for the number of students attending specifically which program?
I'm looking at, I'm trying to get an understanding of how many students we're talking about overall, that the director of the engagement and the attendance office, what are the numbers they're working with in terms of trying to re-engage students?
Okay, so it depends, right? So if you're talking about the engagement center, we might be talking about, say, roughly 50 students or up to 50 students. But trying to re-engage students who are not engaged in school, we could be talking about hundreds, right? There are many students who we must track and must attempt to re-engage who have been out of school for up to 2 years.
Wow.
And particularly, we'll be forever more referring to the pandemic, but this was an issue prior to the pandemic, but even more so now. There are that many students who, at their high school age, they may have taken jobs. We're obligated to reach out to them and to help them understand different pathways for getting a high school diploma and re-engaging. And they're somewhere in the hundreds.
And don't get me wrong, I think it's a worthwhile effort, absolutely. Thank you.
Ms. Mon?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple follow-up questions. So this is a net increase, if I'm understanding this, because I know we had just posted, I know the position Ms. Doherty is talking about, we just posted at our last meeting the attendance officer position. So it's the attendance officer with these two part-time positions that are doing this work. The engagement center, my sense is a separate endeavor. So in the past, we had these two part-time positions. So why are they being put through as independent contracts now and not as part-time positions?
So they were written into the grant as contractual services. So the positions are contractual.
But they weren't in the past.
I think they were last year, but before, I don't want to misspeak, so let me go back to the grant that we wrote last year and double check. I
What I'm
don't
most
think this is a
concerned-
difference from last year, but let me verify that. I don't want to make a mistake.
Just in terms of employment law, there are certain requirements before you can really use a contractor as opposed to a full employee, whether that's part-time or full-time, and just in terms of what requirements there are for support for a staff person. So if we could, I have no problem moving forward, but I would say before we actually enter into these contracts, I'd want to have that information so we could make a decision on that. Thank you.
So, Ms. Morning, with your statement, that's for future
I guess I'd
items,
make a
but
motion.
for today, or do you want to move forward? Do you want to move forward on this?
Yep, I'd be happy to make a motion to move to approve the permission to enter. And I'm just informing the administration that when they bring before they bring the contracts, the actual contracts to us to sign, I'd want to have that information in hand of why that decision was made.
Okay, great idea. Ms.
Thank you.
Thompson?
Mine is on a different item. I was curious about the time frame for the Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust. It's a $97,000 amount, and I was just curious if that's a year, or is that over a year? What was the time frame attached to that particular item?
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. Ms. Turner?
Which one is that?
This Lowell Parks and Recreation, and Parks and Conservation Trust is for after-school programming, and it's supposed to be until the end of the fiscal year.
To the end of this fiscal year?
Yes, yes, so June 30th.
I thought it said for summer, too. Or am I looking at a different one? Oh, okay. Okay.
It say, if it would have been for the summer as well, it would have said after-school programming and the summer school participation.
Okay.
So in this particular one, it is funded by 21st Century Farm to School Student Support Contractual and ESSER funding. So the 97,000 is actually divided between 4 different opportunities.
And is that the same case with the UMass Lowell one
Yes.
that's next?
It is. Oh, the UMass.
It says summer. So it's not, so it won't be limited to this fiscal year?
Right.
Okay.
The summer, the UMass Lowell one does say in Durham, the summer school program.
Okay.
Are you all set, Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. This motion. No, any other comments?
Yeah, if I could.
Mr. Superintendent?
Yeah, just 2 notes, if I could. One, just for the record to reflect on the last page of the contracts, the Collaborative Education CREST. I am a board member of the CREST Collaborative, as is every superintendent in Lowell, just so the record reflects. There is, for the last item on the contract, a bit of a Scribner error from the vendor. This is grant funded, 8460 is the number, still within the grant, 8,460. There's, we were provided after the fact from the vendor themselves that they had a bit of a Scribner error on their part. They are still the lowest cost vendor and still is within the grant. So if the committee is so willing, I would kindly request that that adjustment be made on the floor, 8,460 as opposed to 6,120. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, there was a motion to approve by Ms. Mon, second by Ms. Del Rossi. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Ms. Delay? Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mayor Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Chun? 6 yeas, 1 absent, approved.
We now have a couple of memorials. The first one is for Mr. Michael Capato. He was the Moore School Building Service employee. And also for Ms. Mary Jeffroy, a Lowell High School clerk scheduler, aunt of Freshman Academy social worker Gina Martel, cousin of adult education director Elizabeth McKinnon, cousin of Green Hodge school teacher Kathleen Ramirez, and cousin of former mayor and current city councilor John Leahy. Please dim the light for the moment of silence. Does any member would like to make a comment? Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just would, with my colleagues' indulgence, like to take a moment just in remembering Mary Joffrey, who was a very long time staff member of the Lowell Public Schools at the high school. She also had some other positions, but over 30 years of service to the Lowell Public Schools, and most specifically to our students. Her work at the high school, she crossed over working with students and staff, and really was a part of the fabric of Lowell High School, and she will really be very sorely missed. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Here, now we now go to section 7, the motions. We'll start with 7.1, a motion by Ms. Del Rossi, request a superintendent report on the quantity of fights causing physical harm to students at the high school, second by Ms. Chun. Ms. Del Rossi?
For the most part, the motion speaks for itself. I've just been hearing and getting more information about fights that are pretty intense at the high school. So I'm just concerned about the harm, if there's physical harm that is done to the students, and would like a report in regards to it. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I just have a quick comment from up here, if there's no objection. My part of the, to Mr. Superintendent's part of the report coming back, maybe also include report on the process, procedure, protocol, what happened when there's fights, who's being reached out, whether it's to parents or to other interested party, and see how that's handled as well. Thank you. Hearing no other comments, all in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. Motion 7.2, again by Mr. Rossi, request the superintendent report on the differentiation of grade levels of special education clerks throughout the district. Second by Ms. Thompson. Mr. Rossi.
Yes, so from my understanding, there are various grade levels of special education clerks that work throughout the district in maybe Lowell High School or through at central office, and grade levels that they are paid differently due to responsibilities and so forth. And we've been contacted by certain members, and so I just want to see that we are aware of what the responsibilities are in terms of, so we have an idea of grade level responsibilities and so forth. So in terms of responses, we're fully aware, and so we can have our knowledge and respond to our constituents. Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. We now go to motion number 7.3, a motion by Ms. Thompson, request for the current methodology for retrieving incremental and ongoing knowledge feedback regarding employment satisfaction or suggestions from all district employees to be used as a strategic tool for this committee to consider potential trainings, supports, and to share with HR to utilize with their hiring process. Second by Ms. Martin. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I think that it's important for us to be able to glean information from whomever it's coming from, and our teachers, our staff are wonderful ambassadors for information gathering. And as of right now, we don't have like a specific way for us to get that information so that we can, one, know the climate for them, because the climate for the staff affects the students directly. I think it's really important to get that. But it's also really important for us to be able to look at how we can support our teachers, to make sure that they're getting all the trainings and access to the trainings, to make sure that we know what supports are needed for our teachers, and potentially, and also really importantly, how are we going to be competitive in a kind of tricky, HR world right now. So my intention with this was to really be able to tap into the staff of the district in order to, one, see how they're doing. I think it's important for us to know that, because it, as I said, impacts the district on many levels, but also to be able to take from these experts really great information to make our district stronger. Thank you.
Ms. Doherty.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to ask the maker of the motion if she would be amenable to a friendly amendment. I think this is an excellent motion, and this idea of getting as much information as we can about staff and what their needs and concerns are will make us better employers and stronger in our whole educational purpose. So my amendment would be to include quarterly reports on types of complaints, nature of investigations without any names. I'm not looking for personnel privacy issues, and especially any lawsuits, claim letters, MCAD filings, et cetera, things like that.
Ms. Thompson?
As long as that's something that can be done. I mean, I don't know if there are any legalities to the filings or anything. I think that those are all things that are potentially accessible. I believe that's accessible information to us.
Well, I just want to clarify, so the part that is types of complaints and nature of investigations, that would not include names. That would just be, we had 6 complaints of age discrimination in this quarter, that kind of thing. And that would maybe be a red flag if these kinds of things were happening. The stuff that becomes public is when it's a lawsuit or claim letter or an MCAD filing. That's public information, and we should definitely be getting that information. So I see that there is a differentiation on the level of information that we could be provided.
Okay. That's okay with you, Ms.
Yeah,
Thompson?
I'm not opposed to that. That's fine.
Well, any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion's carried. The next motion is 7.5, also by Ms. Thompson. A motion to obtain full scope of Chief Equity Officer involvement in the employment process to ensure an equity lens is attached to the design of job descriptions and central in hiring choices decisions, as well as the disbursement of talent district-wide. Second by Mr. Rossi.
Mr. Mayor, you skipped one. I mean, I can do this one right now, but
Did I skip
yeah,
one?
the one is about a request on the work update
Okay,
and changes.
There was another one, okay. So let me just go in order, just go backward then. Thank you for reminding me. The next motion is actually 7.4 by Ms. Thompson, request for an update on work changes, policy updates, or remedies surrounding compensation and position classification disparities and additional equity issues be brought to light in the 2018 HR audit. Second by Ms. Doherty. Ms. Thompson?
I think this is pretty self-explanatory. We had a 2018 HR audit, and there were some things that were clearly brought to light, compensation being one of them, position classification disparities was another one that was brought to the forefront. So I'm just curious what we've done in those areas, if we can get some type of report about the progress or potential pitfalls that have happened since the 2018 HR audit. Thank you.
Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Ron. I would also ask that we can friendly amend this to ask that it be sent to a joint personnel and equity subcommittee and be included on the agenda regarding the new HR audit that we voted at our earlier meeting this month. Because I think this information will be very informative as we come up with a scope for a new HR audit. And so I think that would be appropriate. Are you comfortable with that?
I am fully comfortable with that amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
The motion is meant to refer to Joint Personnel Subcommittee?
Personnel and equity
And equity,
subcommittees,
okay,
joint.
wonderful. Second by Ms., just as a friendly amendment, okay, that's fine. Ms. Moran?
If I could, so we are already scheduled to discuss the HR audit at our upcoming Personnel and Labor Relations Subcommittee, which is scheduled for, someone help me out, Jim?
That's next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. So I'd be more than happy to make it a joint meeting, but I just don't want to have multiple meetings, as much as I enjoy this
Good
time with
point.
you all.
I didn't realize it was scheduled.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So if
I
we could
just
just
wanted to-
make that, amend that so that it is a joint meeting of both subcommittees, I think that would be perfect.
Okay.
And I would envision that this 2018 audit will be our starting point. So it would be helpful prior to the meeting next Wednesday if we all receive an updated copy of that.
Okay.
If I could
Through
address
Mr.
that.
Superintendent to Mr. Hall?
Yeah, and I know you all didn't know it was scheduled for next Wednesday, but I wouldn't be able to respond to this whole motion by next Wednesday, but I certainly can bring the audit, because we do have other stuff that we're working on too, if that's okay.
That's more than okay. I think that we'll be able to bring, that conversation about, as soon as I'm able to see it, if the sooner, the better, so that I can really dissect it, and we can have a, full conversation. I'd appreciate it.
Any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it, motion is carried. Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Lay. Madam Secretary, please mark Mr. Lay for being present, so we could have him second some of the motions.
Thank you for your warm welcome, Mr. Mayor.
We now go to 7.5 by Ms. Thompson. Motion to obtain full scope of Chief Equity Officer involvement in the employment process to ensure an equity lens is attached to the design of job descriptions and central in hiring choices, decisions, as well as the disbursement of talent district-wide, second by Mr. Lay. Ms. Thompson?
Thank you for that second, Mr. Lay. I think that this is just, for me, a common sense thing. We have a chief equity officer, and this particular district has put equity as a forefront issue. And it only, for me, makes sense to have the person that has equity as front of mind to be a part of the hiring process, a part of the employment process, a part of redesigning how talent is acquired district-wide. And so that's the reason for this motion. I think that an equity lens needs to be attached to that. She might have to look at, how things have been done in the process, how job descriptions have been written to make sure that they have an equity lens. But again, I think that needs to be something that is a consistent part of the process. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed say, Mr. Lay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a good idea to have a chief equity officer to keep an eye on it. But my question would be, this is involving with the HR. Am I correct, Ms. Thompson? So I'm wondering if how the HR feel about this, whether the HR director thinks that's something that is useful or something that's not useful.
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. Mr. Lay, if I could, the way I'm reading this is just requesting how it currently operates so that the school committee understands. So it says the full scope of involvement within. This would be a description of how we're currently operating. There doesn't appear to be a request to adjust or to change the current organizational layout, if I'm reading it correctly, Ms. Thompson. So
yes, there's no request yet, depending on what we see. But what I will say is, I would, the reality of it is everybody has a level of expertise. Because you're an HR director, it's not to say that she's going to come in and wipe out potentially how things are done, but that may not be the HR director's area of expertise. The hiring processes may not be Ms. Phillips' area of expertise. So that be working together in tandem to be making sure that everything that was covered by using all of their expertise for the district to be stronger.
Okay, if there's no problem, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. The next motion is by Ms. Doherty. Request the superintendent provide the committee with a report on what each elementary school offers students regarding programming, interventions, and support to address learning loss in literacy and math due to the pandemic. Second by Ms. Chun. Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm really just looking for an update on what we're doing, because I think you hear across the country about the losses our students have faced because of the pandemic. And we know that we've got to do the catch-up, the earlier the better. So I'm just looking to get some information about how we've been focusing with the younger students and helping to support and come back from some of those losses. That's my intention. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. That was the last motion of the evening. Good job with the motions and all the comments. We now go to Section 8, the subcommittee's report. The Human Resources and Labor Relations Subcommittee by Ms. Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So the subcommittee had met on September 29th. Present were myself, Mr. Lay, oh my gosh, and Ms. Doherty. Sorry about that. I don't know if I'm missing somebody. That's the problem with my scribbling. Ms. Doherty, thank you. You can understand why I can't see it now. So we did go through a number of positions, and a number of these positions did go through already at our previous meeting. So I am just going to kind of quickly go through the ones that I think, just to kind of highlight which specific positions we discussed, and that the subcommittee had approved. First off was a Director of English Language Services, and 2 district support specialists for English language learners. These positions were all put forward and I believe have already been posted. Great, so we're moving forward with that. We also had moved to increase a stipend payment for Lowell Academy, Lowell Teacher Academy, for the principals who are part of the academy, instructional staff. I should also confess I don't have my glasses, so I'm really kind of guessing at a lot of this stuff. So if anything goes wrong, please correct me. We had also moved to approve a human, human generalist position, human resources generalist position, as opposed to a human generalist. And we did go through that, noting that it is, we put that position in place for the remainder of this school year as something that we would discuss again during the budget process to decide if it's going to be permanent. Same was true for 2 additional security guard positions that we had approved for, to be at the high school. Again, we'll be putting those in place now and reconsidering during the budget process if we want to keep them in place. As we discussed earlier tonight, we did approve the posting of the position of the attendance officer. And then posting the position of the bilingual family liaison lead. I believe we posted that at the last meeting. Perfect. So most of these, again, had gone through before we had the minutes to report on. So a great deal of this work is already underway. So I would submit that as a report of progress and welcome any of my colleagues to make any corrections.
Any comments or questions by any of the members? Hearing none, need a motion to accept the report as report of progress by Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Chun. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. The next subcommittee report is on policy and governance, which was held on Thursday, September 29th. Ms. Doherty, you have a report?
Thank you, Your Honor. The Policy and Governance Subcommittee did meet on September 29th. Present were myself and Ms. Del Rossi, as well as Mr. Lay and Ms. Martin. School department personnel included Ms. Phillips, Mr. Skinner, and Dr. Hall. The focus of the meeting was really to look at the interventions and enhancements report that we had received a few months back. And the reason it went to policy is because at that time the committee had learned that some of these interventions were happening during Allied Arts. It was discussed at the meeting that's no longer happening, that every school is fitting in interventions when they can, but not taking a student's opportunity to experience Allied Arts away from him or her. So at the time, Mr. Skinner was very clear. He repeatedly told us that we only have I believe it's 6 hours and 50 minutes a day. And he was not encouraging the committee to think about adding another policy that restricted principals' leeway with those hours. So given that no school is currently taking students away from their Allied Arts opportunities, or no middle school at this point, we don't really know about the elementary yet, the subcommittee is not recommending a change in policy. But I think it is important to note that, at least for myself, I don't want to deny students an opportunity to have art or music or some other class that would be engaging them because they're falling behind in math or reading. We need to figure that out. So I would just present this as a report of progress.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, need a motion to accept the report as report of progress by Mr. Rossi, second by Ms. Moran. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. One more subcommittee report. The school committee members have been busy the past couple of weeks, which is the Joint Equity and Access and Facilities and Transportation Subcommittee meeting that was on October 3rd, 2022. Ms. Thompson and Ms. Doherty. Who would like to go first? She volunteer you, Ms. Doherty?
I'll be really quick. Ms. Thompson can jump in if I forget anything. So yes, Equity and Facilities met. Chairperson Thompson and myself were present, along with Mr. Lay and Ms. Del Rossi. Dr. Hall and Ms. Phillips and Mr. Dakota, our Transportation Director, were also present. So the purpose of the meeting was to review and discuss the issue of district zoning and school assignment patterns within the context of transportation and how that plays out for our families. One thing I think we all agreed on was we're still looking for those outcomes. We still value rich diversity in every one of our schools. We still value families feeling satisfied and having a say in student assignment. And we still value that every school has, every student, no matter what school they attend in Lowell, has access to a range of services and programs. So with that as our goal, we wanted to look from the lens of how do we do it better? So currently we have 2 zones, and as Ms. Phillips pointed out to us during the meeting, for many families, when they're deciding where they want to send their school, we have citywide schools as well. Some of the things that come right up front for them is what's the middle school, what school does it feed to in terms of middle school? What is the start and stop times? What's the opportunity for transportation? Those are some of the key factors that our parents face. I mean, obviously, if you're a working mom or dad, you've got to get to work and get your child off to school, so busing, transportation is all part of that. So we looked at that. We currently have 2 zones, and we currently have 3 tiers. What that means is every bus goes on 3 routes. So we've divided the schools up across the city by 3 different start and stop times. So at the end of this discussion, and Ms. Thompson can add, anyone else can add if there are things I forget to mention, the bottom line is it's a complex issue. We're looking to come up with recommendations that we can put out for an RFP so we can start to address keeping true to our values, but looking at ways to do it more efficiently, and that's going to not only save money, but be better for our families. As one thing Mr. Dakota mentioned that really resonated with me, if we don't have buses going back and forth over those bridges, right, if we can separate into zones that you stay on one side of the bridge or the other and keep the other values true, like diversity, we could save millions of dollars, like over $4 million, that could then enable us to lessen how much distance you have to walk before you're eligible for a bus. So these are some of the factors that we were looking at, and we had a motion, Ms. Thompson made a motion to recommend the administration come back to the committee with a scope for an RFP, as well as seek advice from the city solicitor once we have that scope, so that we could then move forward with getting an RFP to look at our transportation and school assignment policies. And I would leave it at that, see if my colleagues have anything to add. Thank you.
Just to add quickly, Mr. Mayor, I think the most important thing from this conversation was something Ms. Phillips mentioned, which is we want all families happy. I think that's, where this boils down. I think the other thing that we have to keep as front of mind, and Ms. Doherty spoke to this, was our values. So I think oftentimes when people speak about diversity, and I hear it quite regularly, they think it means race. And that is a component of diversity, but it is not the totality of diversity. So when we think about diversity, we think about socioeconomic. We also think about experience. There's something to be said, and as a person that lives on the other side of the bridge, I do get that. Like, I get the weight of it all, the madness of it all, but I also get that there's a different experience from somebody going to Pawtucketville that goes to Centerville or that goes to downtown. There's something to be gained from that. And so I think that we have to measure that as well as when we think about diversity, what is really equitable. And that's for us, when we speak about our values, we have to remember that equity means lots of things. It means language access, it means race, it means socioeconomic, it means experience. So as we seek an RFP, just to know what that means, I think that also has to be considered. But I also want to consider, and I mentioned this at the end of the meeting, was walkability of the city. There are very limited areas of walkability. Cambodia Town, as one particular area, has invested a lot to increase its walkability, but Pawtucketville, that I live in, I wouldn't have anybody walking those streets. You're walking in the street. Especially when it snows, it's super dangerous. So those are things that we have to also consider as we look into the scope of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. And just going through my notes here, the report here, was there a motion looking for a report from the administration for an FRP to go back to a subcommittee? Would one of you like to continue to make that still, or?
Yes, the motion is at the very end of the report to ask them to come forward with a recommendation on what would be the RFP, the language, and to get the law department's weigh in on that.
Okay. One was a motion on the floor by Ms. Doherty, second by Ms. Thompson. On favor, motion is approved. Any other comments or questions on the subcommittee report? Hearing none, need a motion to accept the report as report of progress by Mr. Rossi, second by Ms. Chun. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it, motion is carried. Before we go to the reports of the superintendent, I see on my agenda that there's a registered speaker. I don't know if that registered speaker is here, is on the motion response 9.3. Why don't you are here, so why don't we save you some time? Why don't we take that item out of order? Need a motion to suspend the rule to take item 9.3 out of order by Ms. Doherty, second by Ms. Thompson. Motion response 9.3 is motion 3, CSO of 9/21/2022 by Ms. Rossi regarding student search policy. Mr. Rossi, would you like the registered speaker to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that'll be fine.
Madam Secretary, please call the registered speaker to the podium.
Hi, good evening. Eric DiLorenzo, and is this like city council? You have to say where you live? East 19th Street, Lowell. I think so.
Okay.
All right. Through an incident that occurred with my daughter last March, I became intimately aware of the LHS search and seizure policy. In my experience, the tip of the spear are the security guards, and they're not up to the task. Security guards are provided limited training when they start the position, and little or no training, little or no ongoing training. LHS leadership has acknowledged that fact. There appears to be limited oversight of day-to-day or moment-to-moment security operations, and the security guards complete too few incident reports and provide too little information to House Deans. Those House Deans then make decisions based on that limited information. LPS policy on search and seizure is overly broad and lacks basic protections from abuse. The Supreme Court has ruled that students do have Fourth Amendment rights, and that for a search to be legal, it must meet two criteria. First, the search must be, quote, justified at its inception, and second, the search must be reasonable in scope. LHS, and probably LPS as a whole, has no process in place to ensure that those criteria are met. Students' rights are being violated, and the city is at risk of lawsuit. Last March, my daughter was lucky enough to find an open bathroom at Lowell High School. She and several girls whom she doesn't know, entered the bathroom at the same time. A security guard entered shortly after. That guard thought that she smelled something burning, ordered all the girls into the hallway. All those girls were brought to their individual house offices, where all but my daughter was searched. For a search to be justified at its inception, the Supreme Court says, quote, individualized suspicion is a necessary element in determining reasonableness. Clearly, there is no individualized suspicion when you aim to search 6 girls, none of whom were observed doing anything wrong. Why then wasn't my daughter searched when all the others were? It's simple. I was at home. My daughter called me and I went to the school. I'm able to spare a few hours during the day to advocate for her. Other parents are not in that position. None of those students should have been searched. Most parents can't leave work in the middle of the day, nor should they have to. Reading the response to Ms. Del Rossi's motion, it's clear to me now, as it was clear to me last March, that the LHS administration did not follow the law nor its own policy when it searched those girls. In June, I met with Latifah Phillips. She shared many of my concerns regarding the equitable enforcement of the LPS search and seizure policy. Ms. Phillips told me then that she would be gathering information and enacting new protections. I could see no meaningful changes have been made. In June, I also met with Michael Fiato. Mr. Fiato stopped short of agreeing that there had been abuses, but did agree that changes needed to be made in the way the policy was applied. In the interest of accountability, Mr. Fiato promised to send a letter to all parents and students at the beginning of this school year explaining the policy and how it would be applied in the future. No letter has arrived. LPS should be able to provide aggregated information relating to the search of any student, such as who responded first, what rule or law was broken or about to be broken, how is a search justified at its inception, what is the gender of the student, what is the ethnicity of the student, who requested the search, who approved the search, what did you expect to find, what, if anything, was found. As of last June, LPS could answer none of these questions, virtually ensuring that students' rights are being violated. It's a lack of accountability, for sure. This also puts the city in a poor position to defend a lawsuit. So many of our students are disadvantaged and/or disenfranchised. They endure indignities every day. Now imagine you're a student who's done nothing wrong. Your personal property is being searched. Your photos, personal notes, medication, feminine hygiene products, clothes for after-school activities, etc., are now on full display. I've been sitting here all night listening to you discuss dropouts, disengaged students fighting, right? And the students are constantly looked at with suspicion. Many of them have been looked at suspicion for every day that they've been in school. And then we sit and we ask ourselves, why are we having these problems? Why are these students acting out? It's really no wonder. If students deserve better, school should be a place where they're protected and should be an oasis. So, thank you.
Thank you for coming forward to speak. Mr. Rossi?
Mr. DiLorenzo reached out to me last spring, pretty upset about his daughter being searched. And I just wanted to find some way to be able to address his concerns in terms of being able to respond to him and to address the why and to give him the reasons to what we can do proactively going forward, and maybe to update, you know, what's going on in the future. Like, as he mentioned, you know, what was the reason, what was the purpose, and not just the observation of what happened. You know, I just think it's, if we're going to take such punitive action in the school, then we need to be accountable on our end also. And I just think we need to put our accountability forward also, and making our students accountable. So we need to do it both ways, you know, and we need to put it in writing and not just do it off of observation. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think that, you know, the speaker makes a very compelling argument, and the ultimate being that schools should be a place where students are protected, where they feel welcome, and where they're respected. And I think that when you look at our policy, it is clear that is the intention. We want to protect our students. That's why we have this policy. But if it's not being applied in a way that is doing that, that's making them feel safe, making them feel respected, then we need to look at ourselves in terms of how do we do that better. And I think it really does come down to training, and certainly not just the security officers, but all the administrators. And I know that's been a huge challenge we've been facing on so many other issues as well. You know, the training that's required. But that's my take from it. Like, when I read the report, it made sense to me. Yeah, these policies make sense, that, you know, if you're not supposed to have criminal substances in your locker or weapons in your backpack or drugs, whatever, but to be in a school environment, you also have your individual rights. And how do we find that balance, I think, means doing a better job at training our staff. And I'd be open to hearing thoughts from the administration. It sounds like the speaker spoke with a number of people, an assistant superintendent, the head at the high school. So what actually has been done, and what should we be looking to do going forward?
Ms. Thompson, I saw your hands up. I think Mr. Superintendent would like to make a comment. Would you like Mr. Superintendent to respond first? Mr.
Yeah.
Superintendent?
Sure. So we have a number of checks and balances and safeguards in place. As the committee's aware, you currently employ 2 full-time attorneys that actually review all of your policies, help to support and design all of your policies. They also help and support all of our school administrators in any type of case of legal question. There's also significant certification licensure requirements for all of our house deans that we just converted to assistant principals to be even more clear in terms of the requirements there, as well as a head of school and an associate head of school. Our head of school at the high school is one of the more experienced high school principals in the Commonwealth, having now served here in Lowell following his tenure in Lawrence, which are 2 of the largest comprehensive high schools in the Commonwealth. We are confident that our administrators are well-versed within the law and have adequate support should they have a question regarding the law with our 2 full-time attorneys. They also have the support of both, again, the Equity Office and our Chief of Schools that investigate every circumstance. If at any point there was ever a concern about wrongdoing, that would be then investigated, and the investigation then would be a matter of personnel that we would then work through, obviously confidentially. We don't have any evidence of any type of broad-based concern in terms of knowledge or lack of knowledge of the law on the part of our administrators. They do receive regular and updated guidance from our in-house counsel.
Okay. Mr. De Lorenzo, just want to let you know that it's not a communication back and forth. If you would like to speak again, I need a
I
motion
just
from...
wanted to clarify with the superintendent, then, does that mean that the,
Sure, if you could just hold on for a second, Mr. De Lorenzo. Need a motion by Mr. Wari, suspend the rule, have the speaker speak again, second by Ms. Martin. Mr. De Lorenzo?
so to clarify, the complaint that I made last year has been investigated, and the results of that investigation are available to me?
Mr. Superintendent?
I would have to check with counsel.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Any one else? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I do have a couple of questions. I think that, and again, I get that keeping a school safe is challenging. It's multi-layered, right? So I think that, to the speaker's point, making sure there's a capricious or fair way that searches are being done is obviously really important. It would be important to all of us because that could be, again, an issue. But I think there's one point of this actually that stood out to me, and it may just be my lack of knowledge about it, and it said that the schools have legal custody of students during the day. I was under the impression that they had physical custody, but not legal custody. And so I think that me maybe not being aware of that, I wonder if parents are also not aware of that. Because for me, I would have done much like what his daughter done and call my mom and say, like, this is what they're about to do, like, what should I do, type of a situation. So I'm wondering if there can be education that is done for the community to be aware of this, because again, I think a lot of times lack of communication, lack of awareness is why some of these issues, and to his point, he's been trying to get communication about the particular situation where his daughter was involved. So that was my first point is, can the student refuse it? And and I'm not saying in a disrespectful manner, but can they refuse it to wait for their, I don't want to say actual parent, but their actual parent, their actual guardian to come to the school so that they feel comfortable about what the process may be to have that search happen to them. My second question is there an accommodation that's made for students that have an IEP or that are special needs that may not be understanding what is happening to them? That is a real concern for me because they may not understand what is happening, may get afraid. And then my last note was a few pages later, and this is a personal reason why I brought this up. I'm afraid of dogs. I think I've mentioned this before. And dogs coming into the schools would maybe have some people have a panic attack. So I'm just wondering if there's preparedness for supports for students when that is necessary. And that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent?
Sure. Yes, so students with identified and defined disabilities are protected additionally under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. All of our administrators are trained and additional guidance is provided. So in addition to the supports that I just mentioned, if a student has an IEP, there's the additional support of our special education office under the direction of Dr. Vicente that has additional supports there that's provided out to schools. Every single one of our deans, our assistant principals, previously deans, are well aware of every student's IEP, hence the reason, as you heard from the speaker, that students are brought to the AP's office. That's one of the protections that's then afforded. And based on the needs and based on the disabilities, those protections are then scaffolded to ensure support for the child.
Any other comments or questions? Here and now, I just want to make a quick comment from up here, if there's no objection. I want to thank you, Mr. Lorenzo, for coming to speak tonight. It's a major concern for many families, and I want to let you know that coming to speak tonight, it doesn't end here. I would like to ask Mr. Superintendent to have, whether it's yourself or someone from the management team, if Mr. Lorenzo is open to it, to reach out to Mr. Lorenzo to further discuss what happened, if, further concerns. At some other times, would you be open to that, Mr. Lorenzo? Okay, absolutely. So if someone from your management team could reach out to Mr. Lorenzo and then keep the school committee members updated, we would appreciate that. Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Doherty?
I'm wondering if we currently have a system in place for training our security officers on some of these issues. I mean, I know our teachers are certified. I'm sure that covers a lot of these areas, and I know each school will have people who go through additional training. I forget what they call it. When you have restrain, about how to properly restrain, or what are the conditions of restraining a child if you need to. So my question is, do we have something in place for training our security officers around these sorts of issues? Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. I'd have to review that. We have security officers are limited to very, very few school sites, so I will certainly check in with the high school, which has the vast majority of our assigned security officers.
Thank you. If you could share that information with the committee, that would be appreciated.
Ms. Martin?
I just have a quick question, just kind of in terms of operations. But the purpose of, in any situation as that's like been described tonight, the actual search would not be conducted by the security office. It would be conducted by the dean in the dean's office. Okay. Thank you. That was just for my own edification.
Okay. No other comments. We'll return back to where we left off, to the reports of the superintendent, which 9.1, the October bias-based incident report. Any comments or questions from the committee member? Does Mr. Superintendent want to make a quick presentation, or is everybody okay with just going to the next line item? Okay, you want to go over it? Okay. Mr. Superintendent?
Sure, Ms. Phillips. Don't load that.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, school committee members, the presentation that you have in your report is the September report. So this includes data that was collected and analyzed of all bias-based and bullying incidents that were reported to the district. So for the month of September, there were a total of 54 incidents. When the incident is filed, the person submitting it has to select what type of incident it is. And so here you see the breakdown of the type of incident. 46% of these were bullying reports, 20% were reports of racism. So out of the 54, that was 25 bullying and 11 racism reports. The majority of these cases for last month involved middle school students, with the greatest number being reported for the 6th grade. I don't have data or analysis around specifically why the 6th grade, but I think these are, as we continue to collect and analyze these reports, we're wanting to understand what are the trends, or, why are certain things occurring? Is this every month that it's 6th grade? Next month it might be, 10th grade. So we will be reviewing the trends. 48% of the incidents were reported by administrators, and students were the second largest group, so 20% of students. We have been doing a lot of work with students to know that the reporting form exists. That is something that we'll continue to follow up on. The students did have a summit in the spring to discuss ways that they wanted to communicate this throughout their schools. So we definitely will follow up now that school is underway. I think now is a good time to see where did the plans go and how are they being implemented. 82% of the incidents were student to student. You see there was a small number of staff to student, student to staff, but the majority were students to students. And in a couple of the incidents, the entire class indicated that they were impacted by the incident. So all of the incidents are expected to be investigated. As of last month, as of the time that this report was pulled, 44% of the incidents that had closed were substantiated. 33% were determined to be unsubstantiated, and we still have 12 reports that are in process, and my staff did reach out to the school. There are varying reasons for why a report might be still open, depending on the complexity of the report. But 42 of the 54 were completed, and 57% were substantiated. So as relates to the 11 reports of racism, 50% of these were at the middle school, 19% weren't specific to a specific grade, and 3 of these reported incidents that involved staff as the aggressors, targets, or both. So again, most of them are student to student, and not so much staff to student or student to staff. And so again, we're continuing to, some of the work that I mentioned in our memo that we want to continue to do is that when an incident is unsubstantiated, especially as relates to racism, we want to look more closely at those. How did the investigation happen? And even if there is not evidence to call something explicitly racism, there probably still is a need to rebuild a relationship, to rebuild the environment. So we want to make sure that even if something has not officially been determined to be racism, that we're not saying, oh, okay, case closed, let's move on, because we know that there probably are, still other, again, just relationship building. We want to make sure that our investigators have been trained, right? Not only in how they conduct the investigation, but how the person who submitted the investigation is treated, throughout the process. These are the actions. Again, you see that there are a lot of actions happening, and we do want to make sure that we're more consistent, across schools in how actions are being assigned. So again, we have this data for September, and it's our opportunity to see, if all of the schools with similar findings are assigning similar consequences. And we did look at the number of days between the reporting of an incident and the launch of the incident. So for the month of September, within, one workday, usually someone initiated the investigation. And we will be looking at what is the average length of time for investigating and closing an investigation. So that is the data that we have for now. And the next steps is, in addition to determining the average length of time for the completion of investigations, again, we do want to look into the unsubstantiated claims, determine what restorative steps are being taken to build positive school communities and relationships. We want to identify additional training for those who are conducting the investigations, and follow up with the student groups around their communication efforts for making sure that students know that this process, the form is online, and what the process is to make reports. And I can stand for any questions.
Is that it? I was just waiting, was that it, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, that concludes the presentation.
Okay, I didn't see who asked hand to go up first, so we can just go from left to right. Mr. Lay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What caught my attention was the three incidents that the staff was the aggressor. And so I'm wondering if we have any data, what kind of aggressor that happened? Do you know?
That's something that I can look up. I don't know offhand.
Okay.
Also, because of the small number, that's probably something
Okay.
that I can share privately. But I think anything that's under 10 incidents, we want to make sure that it's
Okay.
not identifiable to specific people.
And my follow-up question would have been, how do we determine if anything that is substantiated and what's not substantiated? And then do staff have enough proper training?
So that's a great question. And I will say that substantiating racism claims is very difficult because we're not always getting reports of very overt, like racist language being used that we would say, hands down, that's wrong. Oftentimes, it's like this underlying race-based behavior that the person who is receiving it knows this doesn't feel right, but it's hard to pinpoint and say exactly, this is clearly evidence of racism. So, as I mentioned, even if you don't have the clear, definitive evidence to name something racism, we have to do a better job of still educating around racist behavior, right? Am I making myself clear? So if someone uses racial slurs, hands down, we know it's wrong. The discipline, the consequences will, be handed out. But if someone doesn't use that explicit language, but uses other language that feels wrong, that's where it enters the subjective realm that we have to use restorative practices and training and teaching. So unsubstantiated doesn't mean something didn't happen. What it means is that there's not clear and definitive evidence to substantiate the case.
You all set, Mr. Lay? Okay, Ms. Moran?
Thank you very much. I just had a couple quick questions on, and I don't have a number on this, but the action subsequent to investigations of reports of racism. So it's kind of deep in the packet. My question would be, there are the two largest categories, I guess, are not applicable and other. So I'm not, I'm not looking for a breakdown, obviously, of case by case, but I just want to understand, is not applicable, does that mean that there was no action, that it was determined not to be appropriate? I'm just wondering if that's a catch-all or if it actually means something.
Sure, and Ms. Martin, which page are you on? Is it numbered?
Is it numbered?
We'll make sure
It's
to
right
number
near the
the
back.
presentations moving forward.
Third from the back.
Action subsequent to investigations of reports of racism. Okay, I'll definitely look into the definition and make sure I give you the right information.
That would be great, because I do think, to my colleague's point as well, I mean, these 3 incidents, I understand we don't want to get into specifics, absolutely. But like, as I look at these, none of these are staff-based actions. So I'm assuming they're somewhere in those unnamed categories, but I would just like to know kind of where that falls. I'd also say, because, I mean, obviously this is something, and I know based on Ms. Thompson's motion, that we're going to be getting monthly, if I'm correct. So if we could, you know, so obviously you'll be reworking all the graphs so that they can kind of show progression over time. But this one particularly, I spent like 10 minutes trying to figure out the difference between like restorative agreement versus detention, suspension, detention, education. I mean, they all seem a lot, they sound alike. So if we could just kind of maybe collapse them into a few categories, I think that might make it easier for us to track over time. But thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Thompson?
I have a lot to say. Sorry, guys. I'm going to tell you that in advance. So, first, I will say that we did have our first meeting of the LHS Student Advisory Committee today, and we have our representative here. So I'm hoping you also know that you can speak during these meetings as well. So that being said, I did ask them, did they know that this incident reporting form existed, and they said no. So I think that one of them did know because they were working on fixing it, but the rest of the 3 had no idea that it existed. So that in itself is something that we have to work on, and I know you just mentioned you're working on that. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, if in the incidents of the staff, because I think obviously that was starkly, it shocked, I think, all of us. Would, first of all, and I know that you probably can't talk about this, but I think that for the public, where we're kind of showing the punitive measures given to the students, but we're not shown that there's any punitive measure given to the staff, I think that's probably something that the public is like, what's going on? Or is there anything going on? Is this something being brushed under the rug? So I just want to put that out there. I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but I'm sure that the public, and I say that because somebody asked me directly what happened in those incidences. So I think that when we're looking at, would this, I guess my concern is if the staff that was involved was a dean, or whatever they're called now, assistant principals, is that what they're called now? If that person was a dean, how would we know that? And what action would be taken? Would another person be presenting this? Would it be brought to you? Would it be brought to Dr. Boyd? Like, I don't know what the process is for that, and I think that that was a concern, an immediate concern for me, actually a really large one. I don't know if you want to answer those, or if you just want to write them down, then I can. Okay.
Yeah, if I can.
Yes.
I want to make sure I give you accurate information that I am able to share, but I will say that as relates to staff, often it becomes a personnel matter, and so that's something that we need to, talk about, because there still needs to be restorative practices around that, but that is something that we are discussing.
Excellent. I think that the community just wants to know that there are restorative issues that are being put in place, not in so much what they are. I mean, I'm sure some people want to know, but that's another story. And I'm not sure what page this is, but it's the page that talked about the 24 out of 54, the unsubstantiated number. I think that the thing that really, where you're talking about the unsubstantiated cases, and I like that you mentioned that that doesn't mean that an incident did not happen. My concern is when you have been told, so let's say, for example, you've had a race situation, somebody said something to you that was race-based or in concept, and they're saying your case was unsubstantiated. I feel like Latifah Phillips did not believe what I said, and now I don't feel safe here. So I'm wondering what we're doing surrounding that. where we're talking about the punitive portions, restorative justice, even though that's not really punitive, but you get what I mean. We're not really talking about what we're doing to elevate, protect, treat, support the harm that people have been experiencing. Because I've been there where somebody did not believe that something was said to me, oh, maybe you're just imagining it, Stacey. I'm like, I've lived this life long enough to know I'm not imagining what just happened to me. I think also, I'll skip that one. There's a lot on here, I'm sorry. I guess my other question would be, and this is on the one that says, it's on the grade level one, where it breaks down all the different grade levels, and it says total reported incidents of racism in September 22. I guess I'm wondering what type of education, peer-to-peer mediation is being done. Because if someone receives a detention for a few days, what does that really do in the scheme of you calling me the N-word as an example? Like, how does that, yes, you got detention, but now I have to see you in class a couple days later, so, I'm not really looking forward to seeing you potentially in class. So I'm just wondering what that looks like for you all. Is it like over a long period of time? Can you explain a little bit about that?
So, as I mentioned, the consistency across schools is something that we need to look into more, because it is important to have the restorative practice, whether it's substantiated or unsubstantiated. There are schools that have implemented restorative practices around these incidents. I can't tell you that every single school has. And so that's something that we will be looking into. There are schools that have peer mediation programs, but I can't say that every school does. So I think the value of this report in data is that it allows us to see that and ask these questions. We do have a team that we have met with twice now, a community team, and we'll continue to bring that team into this as well. As we look at the data, we come up with solutions, have community conversation around it, and make changes. We go on to the next month's report, see how effective the changes have been. So the questions I'm not able to answer this month, I should be able to answer them better as the months go on.
And I guess my last statement is just, I know that when we think about incidents of racism, for some people it's very vague. But just like we were just talking about the search and seizure policy and, making sure we're doing that the right way, it's so important that we're doing this work the right way, because the damage of, a gun is as damaging as somebody consistently being bullied or consistently having, racial things said to them, because it kills both ways. So, thank you.
Mr. Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow up, so at the beginning of the year, do we have any program to help staff know better what to do, what not to do, or we just operate under the assumption that everybody should know what to do and what not to do?
So the staff do receive annual training, especially around harassment. But I think the investigators, we want to make sure that the investigators get a deeper level of training around harassment, around racism. I think there's been a lot of training around bullying over the years, but racism was just added to this report, I believe 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. So now that that's been added and people are using it, the report is only going to be as good as the people who are reporting feel that the issues have been addressed and resolved.
Okay. So have we have one yet this year?
So we have not trained the investigators specifically in education, in racism, which is why in the memo I mentioned that is a high priority for us, for the investigators, to have that additional.
I think we should have one soon, but thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. Hearing none, we'll now go to the next line item, which is the enrollment report, line item 9.2. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. This one is a standard report that the committee receives. Again, to highlight for the committee, you have within this report our projected number for enrollment, which is for the October count. We'll get that final report. If we don't have it ahead of our next November meeting, we should certainly have it ahead of the second November meeting. But right now, it is, our projection continues to hold that we will be able to be validated by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education with an increase in student enrollment from last year, and it's looking upwards over 200 student increase. But again, that's a projection. It's a forecast based on the snapshot that will have to be validated by next month. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any comments? Ms. Martin?
Just a quick question, if there's any, and I know it's early on, but are we seeing any trend where that increases? Is it across the board, or is there any kind of, is it, you know, at the high school or at any specific level? Just wondering if there's a trend.
Mr. Superintendent?
So the decline, to go back to, so we're not yet back to the increase overall to pre-pandemic levels. That we used to typically hover in the 14,500 range. We went down below 14,000. Certainly that trend was around early learning and the non-compulsory grades. We're starting to see that pick back up, and we're seeing overall coming back to closer to pre-pandemic levels. But I think the closest by way of trend, and I think we're going to have to watch that trend in subsequent years to get back to pre-pandemic, is that the non-compulsory grades, kindergarten, early learning, we're seeing that starting to pick up, that then has a ripple effect up throughout the system as it goes. But we were down to 13,991, I believe, was the low point during the pandemic, and now we're expecting to be back to over 14,200, and pre-pandemic was in the range of 14,500. So that's trending in the right direction, and counter to what many urban communities, particularly Boston, is reporting. They're not picking back up to pre-pandemic levels, significant declines in enrollment. We're seeing a different trend, and it's quite positive.
Okay. Any other comments? Hearing none, we now go to the motion response section. We already have taken up item 9.3. We're now going to go to 9.4. Response to motion 5, CFO of 9/21/22 by Ms. Thompson regarding printers, printing provider. Any comment, Ms. Thompson?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Billy Joe, for this report. I guess, you know, I have to start by saying I appreciate the steps that you took. They were really thoughtful and thorough. I do have two questions. I guess my first question is, what is a reasonable time frame that you think that will actually get the additional printers? That'll be the first question.
Mr. Superintendent to Ms. Turner.
So we've been working, even while we were researching our options with the current vendor, we were already doing walkthroughs with other vendors that are on the state contract list. As soon as we go through the contract process, it would be a 30-day turnaround to get the machines into the schools.
Okay, that's fair, thank you. And my next question is, and this is like, I don't know, when I wrote this, I'm like, am I writing this right way? So it says, how are the current vendors, I know that you're talking about not breaking contract, which I totally get and respect that, but are they currently meeting the contract? Because I know that they're, you know, responding quickly, but what they gave us is not really what they stated they were going to give us, if that makes any sense. So for example, they said that the vendor was going to give us a reliability and speed, and those are the two issues. So I'm just curious if they are, if the contract is still valid. I guess that's my question. I don't know if that's a legal question, but I was just curious.
So the contract language actually states that when we do have a complaint with the current vendor, that we have to give them a legal letter, giving them 15 days to address the situation, which they always do. Unfortunately, we have learned now what their definition of high volume and our definition of high volume differ, and so we'll learn from that mistake. Their machines are literally considered high volume. It's just that it does not address the paper capacity or the speed. One thing we have been doing is trying to find a way to track at the central office any of the work tickets they put into the vendor, so we can see how long it takes to turn that around. We're not able to help if we don't know, right? So if we now have a Google Doc that we're asking the school clerks to enter on when they do call in an order, we can then look at it at the end of the week and step in if they're not being addressed. So in fairness to the vendor, they seem to respond quickly whenever we do send out letters or when we get involved. But then we did hear of a recent incident where they went into the school, reset all of the printers, but then just factory settings, but then that's up to technology to get it all up to speed. So sometimes they complete an order, but it still did not resolve the issue. Does that answer the question? Okay. Yep.
You all set, Ms. Thompson? No other comments? We'll go to the next motion response, 9.5. Motion 2 CSO of 9/21/22 by Ms. LaRossi regarding the newly structured administrative positions at Lowell High School. Ms. LaRossi?
Thank you for this response. It was very thorough. I didn't realize that actually incidences in fights were actually down this year from last year. Because maybe it's because I'm not in the high school. Maybe I'm hearing more of it being out of it than inside of it, but that's good to hear overall. So I'm glad that things are working out with the new positions. It was just a concern that I had just because it seemed like a lot was going on at the time, but if the data is showing that it's less incidences, then, and that we're able to be structuring the new positions in terms of instructional leadership, and that's huge. And the way that the students talked about the climate in the advisory meeting, that everyone's happy and their teacher-student relationships are happy, and so that made me happy, and so that was good. So thank you.
Great comment. No other, Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Ron. I just wanted to say, as someone who was, let's say, concerned about how we were going to do that collaboration between department chairs who traditionally had the role of reviewing teachers and reviewing instruction. And I was encouraged to see there's a plan for professional development, that the new role, the AP role, will be working with the department chairs closely, because I think that sort of consistency around expectations for, high quality instruction is going to have an immediate payback for us. We put that investment in. And as Ms. Del Rossi pointed out, to know that you now have another body in each house that's focused on student support services, that kind of aspect, again, was needed. So I guess really my question, if you could just remind us, how many students in each house?
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. Mr. Skinner?
Approximately 700.
700. So you've literally taken what was once one role and broken it into two separate roles, right? The AP and the student services person. I mean, there's differentiation in what their roles are, but you have another adult helping to provide services and supports to those students and the teachers who are instructing them. Would you say that's accurate?
That's correct, with the caveat that the assistant principals have an expanded role in instruction that they didn't have when they were deans.
Right. They were just focused on the discipline piece.
Correct.
Right. All right, thank you. I thought this was very informational.
Ms. Thompson?
Sorry, you guys are hearing from me a lot tonight. So it seems like obviously we have these two roles, and I'm glad that there are the two roles, but I do have a question. Obviously, the new AP role, the way that it looks designed and structured is more administrative in nature, so it's less one-on-one relational or different than in a different scope than it was before. So I'm just curious, since it seems like the student support specialist is kind of that go-between, they're the person that is doing more work one-on-one, well, in the title, it kind of speaks to that. Who is having the conversations surrounding bullying and discrimination? Is it them or is it the AP? And I say that because if they're actually having more one-on-one relational with the students, they're the ones who should be potentially having those conversations. They're the ones who should be putting in the incidents, because now the way that the APs are, they're a step removed from that relationship. So I'm just curious about that and potentially what type of autonomy exists in the student support role.
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Skinner.
It's really both. So with the risk of confusing the question in my response, in a middle school, for example, we have a principal and assistant principal. I would hope that both of them are dealing with student issues, bullying and so on. There may be, of course, a greater proportion of those issues being dealt with by an assistant principal. At the high school level, the assistant principal is now responsible for their house in a way that they weren't previously, and they have an additional support person in the student services position. So that student support person might be doing more of that work that you're referring to, but the assistant principal I should be absolutely intimately involved in that work as well.
I guess my ask then, or if it's a motion, is for the student, if they're not currently having access to drafting those reports, those incident reports, having those conversations, I would like for those people, in addition to the assistant principals, to be tapped into those conversations. My big thing is, if there's a measure of more comfort with that person, I want students to be able to have that person as an additional conduit, I guess, to that process, to that reporting process.
Thank you. I think I understand your point a little bit more now. What you just said is very sensible and very much happens at the school. And I'd expand it beyond the assistant principal and the student support services person to guidance counselors and social workers and so forth. Students have access, and oftentimes one student might have a better rapport relationship with the social worker and go there. But you know, the deans were in place who are now APs. The student might have known one of them for longer and go there. The student support services person might be their preferred option, but the student should have a relationship with a trusted adult, and it could be any of them.
Okay, you all set? No other comments? We'll go to the next line item, motion response 8, COO of 7/13/2022 by Ms. Doherty regarding the status of the Lowell High School construction project. Any comment, Ms. Doherty?
I thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate getting this report. I'm interested in this update from the viewpoint of the construction team, but I think from my perspective, I was really looking at it from the lens of our people in the building. And like we heard from the students tonight at the advisory board about noise and air quality, changes in walking routes, and I'm not looking to put a whole lot of work on people, but I'm just thinking if we had just a one-page update, and certainly if there's any major changes or impacts, so that we as a committee would know what's happening on the ground for those people that are in the area of the construction, our students, our staff. I've heard issues with air quality. Those are the kinds of things that if we had an update and maybe what we're doing, if there are situations where we should be doing something that we're not doing, or thinking about resolving an issue in a different way, it starts by having the information. So that was really my hope with this. I'm happy to get this piece, but I was also thinking of it from the lens of the people that are in the high school and what these changes have meant. Like, I had somebody from the cafeteria workers reach out to me about how the refrigeration they'd have to leave the building, and I don't know if that's even still true, or if that was just getting ready for the start of school because of construction constraints. So those are the kinds of things that I was thinking of, and I don't know if there's a concern with being able to provide us with that information, but that was really my intention. Thank you.
Ms. Mon?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. To my colleague's point, I would agree that that would be really great information for us to have. I know that we had the school building committee had met tonight at 6 o'clock across the City Hall. So we did get some information, but there wasn't anybody there who was talking about kind of on the ground, you know, from the school department's perspective. And I do think that this is, I wasn't able to come, I was at that, so I couldn't come to the student. So I hadn't heard about continuing air quality concerns and things like that. So it really would be good information to get cycled back to that school building committee. So I would certainly, you know, encourage if we can get some kind of on-the-ground reporting from staff and our facilities people that can give us, you know, real-world concerns that we can bring to that committee, that would be really helpful. I'd also say the highlight of that meeting was there is available, you know, for colleagues in the overall school community, Lowell Telemedia Corporation has done a video on the new gym, which is really cool, and it looks beautiful. So for anyone who hasn't had a chance to get over and look at it, I literally just saw it before this meeting started. So it looks great, but I definitely encourage, if you go onto the LTC site, you should be able to find that video. That's kind of a behind-the-scenes tour of the facility, of the weight room, the kitchen. So it's really looking very impressive. Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Doherty?
I just want to add, so that piece of information would be very helpful to be in this little one-page update for us, and, you know, that we can share with our school community. If you haven't seen the new gym, you know, check out this link at LTC or whatever. So I'm just looking, as we are that our role is the education of our children, and we need to be up to speed on these things. That's my perspective on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you two like to resubmit the motion to get that report back so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle, or does Mr. Superintendent just want to provide a report when it's available to the committee by email or some other methods of communication?
Yeah, I will certainly work to discern it. But for the committee, we do have, I am a member of the school building committee. The school building committee is assigned through city council, through the city manager. So I'm trying to understand, and I think if any committee guidance as we provide these reports, school building committee, city council, city manager's office, we have an project manager, which is our owner project manager. That's their assignment, that's their paid assignment, that they provide these reports out. So we can do an additional report, but to continue to get the guidance on what the committee's looking for, I do want to remind everyone's invited to attend the school building committee meetings. And as well, what you have in your packet tonight is the prior school building committee report, and we can certainly continue to generate those. But I'll work on it, we'll provide something, and we'll see if that meets the committee's wishes.
Ms. Moran?
I guess just in terms of how we kind of can create a pathway for this information, if the student group here this evening brought up issues, I'm assuming they did? Yes. Okay, good. I think if we could get that in the form of a report, then that is something that can be shared with the school building committee, you know, and ensure that it's being addressed. I think that's an appropriate conduit that doesn't require you to come up with any new reporting. It just takes what these students reported tonight. There should be minutes from that meeting so that we could use that to inform. My personal preference would be we bring it to the manager. He's the chair of the school building committee, so he'd be able to share it with the committee. Does that make sense?
Simple enough, yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. Ms. Doherty, any other comment, or you all set?
Well, I was thinking there are other members of the district who are on that building committee, right? I think that, our facilities manager, doesn't he have a seat on that?
Yes,
And
sir.
he's somebody who's at the high school, or the facilities people at the high school are going, because I think the builders are coming from their perspective, like, we're at phase one, we completed this, then we're going to do this. I'm looking at it from the perspective of what's happening for the people in the building. How are they adjusting to, now you can't walk out this door, you've got to go around this way, you know? So I really am not trying to create a whole bunch of work, but we've got people, you know, paid staff who part of their responsibility is the high school facility, part of their responsibility is sitting in on these meetings of the school building committee, but would also, if we could be in the loop of communication. And I don't know if that's any clearer for you. But I'm really not looking for this huge thing. I'm thinking like a one-page update. This report is fine from, from the building perspective, the builder's perspective. I'm looking at it from the end user perspective.
Mr. Superintendent?
I think I'll work to make sense of it.
Any other comments? And again, Mr. Porter, if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand. No other comments. We'll go to the next line item, which is 9.7, response to motion 3, CFO of 9/21/22 by Ms. Thompson regarding diversifying contractors and partnerships. Any comment, Ms. Thompson?
Great job, Billy Joe, again. Look forward to what the results are. That's it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Turner?
I did participate in the supplier diversity today, and I do have a bunch of information, so I will update the report for the next meeting so that I can include everything that I learned today.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll go to the next one, 9.8, response to motion 6, CFO of 9/21/22 by Mr. Rossi regarding unpaid invoices. Mr. Rossi?
Thank you for this also. This was just spurred by email I was contacted by for an unpaid invoice from a couple of years ago. And I just wanted to make sure there were no more or whatever unpaid invoices that we were aware of, and so that we were on top of things. So thank you very much.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll go through the last communication from Superintendent tonight, 9.9, Personnel Report. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. 9.9 and 9.10 are the standard required reports, the personnel report and the home education report. If there are any questions, staff's available.
Okay. Ms. Moran?
I just had a quick question. How long a period this covers? The personnel report.
Thank you. Dr. Hall?
It is like ginormous.
I'm sorry, how far back it goes?
Yeah.
I believe this one is 2 to 3 months, but there may be some additional ones that we didn't report previously that we discovered.
I'm not wrong, right? I mean, this is a dramatically larger report than we usually get.
Is this like end of the year?
That's what
and
I'm wondering. Does it
summer-
include all
summer
the,
hiring?
go back to June as
Yeah.
opposed to go back to?
That's-
Okay,
Okay. Are you all set, Ms. Moran?
okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Your Honor. I just have one quick question. So it is big, but I noticed there were 53 total resignations. And I know in the spirit of getting more information and feedback from our employees, I know I'd asked you at a previous meeting about the exit interviews, and you said not many employees are choosing to do them. So my question is that a standard practice for us to offer? If somebody calls HR and says, I want to put in my resignation, or emails, I'm putting in my resignation, do we offer them the opportunity, would you like to, have an exit interview?
They should be sent those, Ms. Doherty. I've instructed the HR staff to do that. I know someone forwarded me their retirement notice earlier this week, and I said, and I attached the exit interview and said, would you like to fill this out? So that's definitely going to be a practice going forward, but I did check on that at the last meeting, and we should have a report on that soon.
I just think it would be very helpful, resignations, especially if somebody's leaving, what's prompting them to leave our wonderful district? Was it this great job offer, change in location, whatever? But to be able to start to collect that data, I think will, again, inform us. So I think it should be part of the process of leaving the Lowell Public Schools, whether you're resigning or retiring, to be offered the opportunity to provide some feedback. Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, that concludes the reports of the superintendent. Need a motion to accept the reports 9.1 through 9.9 as report of progress by Ms. Chuen, second by Mr. Lay. On favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. The next one is 9.10, the home education. Any comments? Ms. Doherty?
Motion to approve.
Second by Ms. Moran. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty? Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mayor Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Chun? 7 yeas, approved.
We now go to the new business. Start with 10.1, the budget transfer in the amount of $60,000. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, need a motion to approve by Mr. Rossi, second by Mr. Lay. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mayor Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Chun? 7 yeas, approved.
10.2 is the approval of job description and permission to post Director of Parent/Family Leadership Institute. Any comment? Hearing Ms. Doherty?
I'm not going to approve this job description. I have expressed concerns from the beginning that I felt we are spreading ourselves too thin in too many different areas, so I won't be supporting this position.
Okay, anybody want to make a motion to approve? Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Moran. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Actually,
I didn't see whose hand go up. Ms. Moran? Okay, Ms. Moran, go ahead.
And I apologize, as we were communicating, Ms. Phillips, that I was thinking of a different position, so I wish you had kind of just corrected me that I was talking about the wrong thing.
Okay.
But I do still focus here on the salary range. There's no salary range cited here. So I'd want to know what that range is before we approve a position.
Okay. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. Yes, that was one of the questions that we were continuing to analyze on behalf of the committee based on the feedback. So 2 things took place here since the last time this came to the committee. One is, and it actually speaks a bit to Ms. Thompson's motions earlier about how the Office of Equity and HR works in collaboration. So I appreciate the question. So the HR office, under the leadership of Dr. Hall, did engage our collective bargaining units to determine and assess whether this job would be claimed for affiliation. It was determined that it would be unaffiliated through those conversations. Then the equity office conducts an internal review of our current salary schedules to determine what would be most commensurate to ensure that we don't have an equity issue on the back end through an arbitrary salary schedule. So on your desk, based on that review, it was further confirmed and validated that the most commensurate salary schedule, most applicable salary schedule, is for the Director of Adult Education. So you see that while this position is not the Director of Adult Education, it's the most commensurate. So in terms of, from an equity perspective, the recommendation from the Equity Office is that we align the salary schedule with the Director of Adult Education. That's the handout that I provided to you. You should have that on your desk. That's the most applicable salary schedule. The committee, of course, can make any determination it chooses, but that schedule actually lines up with the budget authority that was granted and approved within the budgeting process this past year. So the salary schedule there, I believe it starts at, and Dr. Hall, if you can help me through that one, because I believe you did that review. I think it starts at 110, if I believe correctly. So you should see that on the, I want to say it's the second from the bottom row within the handout I provided. Has 3 different positions that are currently aligned within that current schedule, and that goes everything from bachelor's degree all the way up with full salary schedules. The recommendation based on the equity analysis is that's the most applicable salary schedule for wage equity purposes. That's what our recommendation would be in terms of where you see applicable salary schedule, and that's the reason for it stating such.
Okay. Ms. Moran?
Thank you very much. So your premise is that this position is equal to the Director of Adult Ed position?
Most comparable based on the equity analysis, yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to understand that. How many positions are reporting to this position? that require supervision, ongoing review?
Sure. So the number of positions that would report would be the number of courses, opportunities, workshops that will be provided on a stipend basis, which would be offered by parents themselves, teachers or other support staff. The number of positions then could be small to large based on how much is designed and how much the demand is. So the difference between the two is you wouldn't be supervising full-time or part-time staff. Instead, you're supervising stipended staff or additional after-hours work staff that then would be supervised by this position. So those positions would have, and tell me if we need anything briefer, but those positions would have a supervisor that would evaluate them for their standard work, and then this would be additional work that would report through this position. So that additional work, the hourly work, and the way this might be equated, how our Lowell Teacher Academy director position typically works. So those are stipended additional mentor hours and mentor time, supporting teachers that are within, but the teachers are actually evaluated by the principals.
So there's no evaluation responsibility held by this position?
For the stipended roles, there will be the evaluated position of the program workshops and courses of the stipended position. So yeah, their implementation there and whether they're renewed and continued would be a role and responsibility.
So you're presenting that for every workshop presenter, whether that's a staff member of the Lowell Public Schools or someone we bring in from outside, they're going to undergo the same kind of DESE evaluation that's required for all of our teaching staff? It's going to be that same level of intensity for someone who came in to do a three-session workshop session?
DESE doesn't have a framework for that, but
Really? They don't have a framework for teacher evaluation?
No, you're talking about for Parent Academy courses compared to the
Yes,
teacher?
I'm sorry. What I'm trying to find out is how you compare our adult education director, who has 30 to 35 full-time staff, I'm estimating on that, who she's responsible for running all that programming for hundreds and hundreds of students who come through both to get education in terms of language, and others, who are coming through for a HiSET certification, how that compares to somebody who is running a parent information institute, who is offering workshops for parents. To me, these are two very different positions, and I don't see how you can correlate the same salary level for these two positions.
Yeah, so I would agree. They are very different positions. So the question each time we have a new position, and this has caused challenges internally, historically for the district, is we've got to look at a comparability review. So that's what's undertaken within the Office of Equity, looking at what's the most comparable position for salary schedule. You'll actually see within that salary schedule that there's vastly different positions listed within that same salary schedule. So what then the review will be is taking a look at all of our salary schedules, what's the most comparable salary schedule, and then which one would it fit into to allow for equity purposes, wage equity purposes. So there are 3 different positions, I believe, in there that are all different: Director of Alternative Ed, Title I Director, and Director of Adult Education. So then the next step is to say which one is most comparable, what position, and does that salary schedule, is there a more comparable salary schedule? They're not the same. But those 3 positions are vastly, vastly different, not even in the same field of work, and that yet they've been found to be on the same comparable salary schedule. So I might contend that this position might have different responsibilities that may be from somebody assumed or assessed to be less for the Director of Adult Ed, but would be quite significantly larger than Title I Director, but that's also fitting under that salary schedule as well. So it's never an exact science finding a comparable salary schedule if you don't have an exact position, but that was determined to be the most comparable, the most appropriate fit, hence the recommendation. The challenge on the back end is far more difficult. If you have somebody come in that's in an inequitable position and determines as such, that creates far more challenges as this organization has experienced. Excuse me.
I don't see the correlation between these two positions, and I appreciate your presentation. But it doesn't convince me that these are in any way similar levels of responsibility, not in terms of qualifications, not in terms of responsibilities. So I just feel that the salary isn't appropriate. So I'm not going to be able to support it, but you have.
Okay, so, Ms. Mon, when I was reading the motion, you were raising your hand to ask question, I thought was to second it, so.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I
Yeah,
didn't
so,
know.
so Madam Secretary, please withdraw the second by Ms. Marn. Ms. Thompson?
This particular position has gone around and around, and from what I hear, it's been around since before I was on the committee. I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is, do we think that this position is necessary? Now, I'm going to say I do, so I can only speak for myself. I think also when we're looking at this position, and I'm thinking about this as my role when I was teaching. My last teaching job, I had to design curriculum from scratch. So if you've never done that before, this person, and I could be wrong, so Ms. Phillips, correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be. This position looks like it is designing literally a program from scratch. So innovating a brand new program that then, after brainstorming kicks in, after ideations, after iterations of different things, is going to be the person that pushes those things out. So I think that, I agree that the correlation between, adult ed and that may not be the same thing. But I think the questions we need to be asking ourselves is, one, do we think this role is important? Two, if you think it's important but you don't like the salary requirement, what would you suggest is an equitable salary in order for the supports and the idea of this program to move forward? And I say that because there are so many engagement and equity responsibilities, and the longer we hold up, and I'm not saying, I think the longer we hold up things like this that have great bones to them, there are going to be, things that could be falling through the cracks. So I guess my pushback to my colleagues would be, one, do you support the position? If you take the money out of it, do you support the role because of what it does and how it supports the family, the learning community, the community learning program, excuse me? And two, what would you offer as a salary, an equitable salary?
Ms. Thompson, would that be a question to anyone? I'm sorry, to the colleagues? Does anyone want to answer that, Ms. Martin, or?
I can just speak for myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I have liked the idea of the Family Leadership Institute from the beginning. But I think that, from my perspective, and you've worked in nonprofit and as well as working in teachers, as a teacher, I can look at a community organizer position, at a program coordinator position that would do this. And in a nonprofit sector, right or wrong, I mean, this position would be at about 75, maybe 80,000. So, I mean, I just don't see and again, the comparisons, I don't feel are valid. But I think if we made this an appropriate salary level, then I'd certainly be willing to move forward. Again, I'm one person, so everyone knows how to count. So I don't know where else everybody else is.
Mr. Lay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. By reading the job description, I feel that this position is not very much involved with students. Am I right? Not too much hands-on with parents or students. It's more like administrative level. So I feel that what's needed, if I go to schools right now, talking to people, they always need more staff to help students. And I feel that we have enough directors. I don't know how many more chiefs we need so I'm reluctant to support it either at this point, because I feel that this position does not directly helping the students.
Mr. Superintendent, to Ms. Phillips.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips.
So I'm looking at our fundamental commitments, and our top fundamental commitment is to eliminate the racial, ethnic, and linguistic achievement and opportunity gaps among all students. And one of our core beliefs is that parents are our partners, they're the first teachers in the home. And so while this position may not be working with students, it's working with parents. And we cannot close opportunity gaps and achievement gaps without empowering our families, without helping them understand the school system, without helping them understand what a college and career pathway looks like, without learning from them their understandings of their home systems or other systems. We cannot close these achievement and opportunity gaps if parents are not viewed as our key partners. So I just wanted to share that because when we talk about direct service to students, you're right, this position is not working directly with students. But if you believe that the family is a critical piece of a successful student, then this position absolutely is serving students.
Mr. Lay?
Thank you. So if that's the case, why do we need a director? Can a parent liaison, can those people in those positions take those responsibilities? Would that be something that you can work with?
Mr. Superintendent?
Yeah, so we've done that and no is our answer. This is a full-time responsibility. So if we go back in time, so as Ms. Thompson said, this has been a discussion since 2020. So we had the opportunity through a grant, through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, to pilot this type of program. The reason we had that opportunity through a grant is because this is a widely established and widely utilized strategy across the country. This is actually one of the first districts I've worked in that has not had a program such as this in design and in implementation in some time for me. So getting that grant was a real opportunity, and that was at a time when we were talking about significant budget constraints. So working through that grant as a pilot opportunity, and now what we saw through that was at the Greenelge and the Robinson, the testimonials from parents at that time for involvement within that program for 2 schools, which is where we got a chance to see what that would look like actually with current staffing to be able to implement at 2 schools. It was a stretch with the grant to be able to do it with current staffing at 2 schools. Matter of fact, Ms. Phillips herself has designed out and built out and led these types of initiatives elsewhere, knows the amount of manpower, woman power that's required there to implement. We saw the testimonials were consistent with the satisfaction and testimonials from districts elsewhere. 100% powerful, supportive testimonials from parents saying, let's do more of this. The next step that we did is we had the opportunity at that time, fortunately, with ESSER, where it was then built within our 3-year ESSER plan at that time that was then presented to the committee in the spring of 2021 based on expansion out of this programming. At that time, the committee may remember we went even back and forth on what the name of it was. We started with Parent Academy, which is the broadest and most universal use of terminology for these types of programs around the country. And we had it within ESSER. But another question of the committee was the question of sustainability of funding. So there was a question of sustainability, plus there was a question then from the committee of what would it look like to expand. We went through that, so the committee put that funding into suspense at that time. Through last year, we went through a full stage of discussion around planning, and part of the adjustment we made for sustainability is we moved the funding into our general fund because at that time we had the Student Opportunity Act that came into play with last year's budget, this year's budget, last year's budget cycle. So within that approval, the committee did actually approve it. So the entire committee approved and actually approved it at $120,000 as a cost within the general fund for sustainability purposes. But then it was brought back, and it was brought back in the, as a position, which was the next step, and then we've gone through continued discussion. So I think it is true that both it's been extensive discussion, extensive attempts here to make sure that we understand how it can be implemented. Mr. Lay, through that time, we've understood that it cannot be implemented with current staffing. It will require both full-time as well as stipended. And secondarily, that we do have the funds, that it is extraordinarily important in terms of our commitments and our beliefs, and that it is sustainable within our general fund. That steps have all been taken, hence it's being brought to you back now, but the funding has already been approved within the budget, so hence a decline will bring back to you a budget transfer to transfer out of this program into something else.
You Also, Mr. Lee?
Just one more question. So if we don't have this position, then what happened? I mean, if we don't have that position.
We don't have a family institute. So, Mr. Mayor, if I could, that's the guidance that we're looking for here, because we've gone through extensive amounts of planning and discussion. We've had parents that have come out with extraordinary support, and we need to give a message back. Either we're going to do it or we're not. So the guidance I'm looking for from the committee, and certainly if there's recommendations for improvement, we'll certainly take those. I do think there's an obligation. There's been a question from the committee on equity analysis. The recommendation you're getting on salary is from the equity office's analysis of comparable positions. I believe it's our obligation to provide you that recommendation. But here we're looking for guidance. Are we going forward or not? And that's the decision point we're looking for.
You all set, Mr. Lee?
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Chun?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And while I'm reading the title of the position, again, for us, we're forgetting the most important aspect into our students' learning is getting our families involved and engaged. Again, growing up not knowing a word of English, making sure that we have something that help empower and encourage our families to get actively involved and understanding the importance behind the reason why our students are, again, we see the data and we want to make sure that we empower our families to build that gap, build that bridge to get rid of that gap where the learning is, there's some, again, reading this, I feel there is a need for this. I mean, I understand, I'm speaking from my own personal experience and also speaking from a perspective of an educator and also as a parent. So I would love to see this kick off. It's a process. I can tell that it's one thing that we either on board with it or we, find another way. But I support this because I really need to have our families understand the importance, why our kids need this empowerment with our parents and our students' education. Thank you.
Mr. Rossi?
Thank you. I keep looking at this and thinking how important this position is and that what is it missing and who would actually this position be actually working with and who would be reporting to. And I think the key component that this is missing right now is that this position would be primarily working with all the parent liaisons in the district to coordinate these programs. One of my friends worked as a parent liaison at the Robinson when you piloted this program, and she talked about how successful this program was and how essential it was for the parents. So I think if you include that piece, that you would be coordinating with the parent liaisons through all the schools. I think that's the key piece that's missing in this whole job qualification and what's going to be required. And I think that's what's missing in this. And then that would justify so much more to this. Because when you read through it, it's a little scattered in the responsibilities, but if you specify that piece of it, it makes more sense because you'll be working with all of the parent liaisons that are in direct contact with all the parents that need to know what's going on with all the parents in the schools, and therefore coordinating with this director of Family Leadership Institute who's going to go and get what they need and coordinate what they need for this program, that program. And I think that's the key piece that I think we're all looking for in this position. And I'm not 100% sure when I say that, but that's what I'm thinking when I look at this, that key piece. And when I hear you guys talking about how successful it is, and I know how successful was just talking to my friend when she spoke of it. So I don't want to lose this opportunity, and that's my subcommittee too. I don't want to lose it. When I heard Dr. Boyd say we'll lose it, I said, I just can't imagine that. So I don't want that to happen either, you know? So I feel like we need to work with this a little bit. Thank you.
Ms. Thompson, do you have something else to add?
I just think we need to vote at this point. I think we need to vote whether or not to move forward with this. Potentially, one thing comes to mind is approving this. And again, we can consider however everybody else feels, but without a salary. However, approving the appropriate salary in an executive session, should it come to that.
Yeah, so we currently we don't have a second yet. That's Ms. Doherty. Do you have something else to add?
I'm willing to offer a second, and I want to say I've listened closely. This is why we have discussions, because I think that for me, a lot of the problem was I felt it was a high-end salary. It was another chief, like administrator role. And I do see it more as a community organizer. But if you look at under specific responsibilities, number 4, work closely with parent organizations, schools, central office, community partners, and district consultant to support implementation of a cohesive district-wide strategy centered on parent-family engagement. We absolutely need that. And I guess from my perspective, as someone who came up on the Citywide Parent Council, we have had opportunities to strengthen those partnerships. When I got involved in the Citywide Parent Council, it was a very strong organization. And then when I got off the committee, it seemed to dwindle. But when Dr. Boyd came in and we gave added input for parents through the school site councils, I thought that was another uptick. So this, looking at this from the perspective of growing that and really building out on that. But I don't see it as heavily curriculum and creating curriculum as much as community engagement, involving parents, and providing education, as Ms. Chun said, so they see they are valued members of their children's education. So I'm going to support it. I do have concerns with the salary. I wonder if we could do a range. We're talking about 110 as a base. If the superintendent would be, if you're looking at someone who comes in with a master's degree, yeah, that's going to be the higher end. But I just would throw that out there. But I do feel the other concern I had with it is I think we're getting very ambitious, which the superintendent talked about that, the sustainability piece, because I have lived through those lean times. And I'm nervous about putting on too many positions, but I am open to supporting it.
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. So I think what's important to look at in terms of the wage analysis, because I don't think any of you are wrong in looking outside of the organization. I think what's also necessary and what the Equity Office has to conduct is the internal analysis, because you're hiring someone into the organization. And somebody coming into the organization at one position, comparably speaking, will look across to their colleagues and their peers. They will select into a position based on a job description and based on a job posting. Once they're hired into a position, they will then look at the comparability of their current wage against those in the organization currently. And typically, because there's more discretion for the committee around salary assignment for unaffiliated positions, the tendency is that we are creating some wage equity challenges by looking outside of the organization for unaffiliated comps and within the organization for our affiliated positions as we negotiate at the bargaining table. That has created a disparity within the organization that has been flagged by the Equity Office. So we could certainly set whatever salary we choose. The committee has that discretion. I bring to you a recommendation and would urge caution just based on the feedback I've gotten in terms of the internal analysis. Now, so again, it's usually when you do a wage study, and I think, and Ms. Martin is absolutely accurate, you look across industries, you look locally, regionally, and nationally. There are also times where the internal comps might be different than those national, regional, out of industry comps. And when that occurs, it creates a wage equity challenge. And that's what's been flagged by the Equity Office, and the strategy and the approach that our Equity Office has suggested is that we look to internal comps, we utilize internal comps, and the entire organization as a whole, through both bargaining as well as the wage study that we're undertaking, we right-size the organization as a whole, and we don't identify individual positions that would be right-sized. And as an example of this, the committee may recall, we've made adjustments to fringe benefits, we've made adjustments to vacation time. Every time we do that at this table, we should recognize, once we hire someone in and they recognize that, they then come back and request an inquiry into that. And that's then significant work at the expense of our HR office. Hence the reason for the recommendation, hence the reason for the adjustment through the Equity Office in terms of flagging these and in terms of providing recommendations. So I hope that's a little bit more clarity. I would say from Ms. Thompson's perspective, in order for me to go into individual circumstances and how that analysis is conducted, executive session would be more appropriate.
So for clarity, for all the members, it sounds like the body supports the position, but is questioning the salary. But the vote here tonight, Mr. Superintendent, it's for the position and the salary. So are we now just voting on the position and we'll discuss the salary in the executive session? What is the recommendation, Mr. Superintendent?
So my recommendation, and I feel obligated to provide that recommendation to the committee, is based on the equity analysis and the range that I have provided. I think the offer I provided out is if we're going to discuss individual circumstances of concerns that have been raised that has led the Equity Office into that type of analysis, that would be eligible under executive session. Talking about a position that doesn't currently exist, that isn't being negotiated, I don't know that that's eligible in executive session. So the recommendation here is based on an analysis by the Equity Office. That would be the recommendation I put forward for committee's consideration.
So is that, Ms. Thompson, is that clarified? Because we're voting on the position and the salary range, not going separately, discuss it separately. Okay, and Ms. Doherty, you are second the motion? All right, Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Ms. Del Rossi? Yes. Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
No.
Ms. Martin?
Present.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mia Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Chun? Yes. 5 yeas, 1 nay, 1 present. Approved.
Okay, we now go to the next line item. Just need a motion to approve the out-of-state and overnight travel request by Lowell High School staff members to Denver, Colorado. Motion by Ms. Doherty, second by Ms. Thompson. On favor, roll call, please.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mia Chow? Ms. Chun? 7 yeas, approved.
Ms. Mon?
Before we adjourn, Mr. Mayor, I was hoping to take a point of personal privilege with my colleagues' indulgence. I did just want to follow up on a motion that was made 2 meetings ago where we had requested to have the health department come and discuss with us plans around some concerns that were raised during the registration process, ideas for how we may want to make some changes to that process as we move forward. I would like to just inform the mayor and my colleagues, my plan after tonight's meeting is I'm going to be sending an email to the city manager's office, also to the mayor and his colleagues, and you can all get CC'd too, just requesting that the health department please, acknowledge our invitation to come to our next meeting so that we can get the information we need to move forward on that process.
Noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, need a motion to adjourn by Mr. Lay, second by Ms. Thompson. On favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. The meeting is adjourned.